It's okay. I have a cold, so I'm not going to scream. Plus, I think we have an in-house AV guy, so he's got me all hooked up to it. Mike, I'm going to sing. Lucky you all, I'm going to sing. Yeah, only worse. So I just would like to thank everybody for coming today. As usual, we have a really good crowd. I rented 75 chairs, so I guess everybody can do the math. So I do want to thank everybody for coming again. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about electrical issues, and it's always a hot topic here. Try not to let the smoke out of the wires, but sometimes the smoke has already come out of the wires. But I thought first I'd like to introduce people that work for me. I have Shane. He's our mechanic. He's handing out tickets. We're actually going to have one giveaway, but then everybody's going to get a consolation prize. So nobody's going to leave. Of course, you won't leave hungry, but then you also have something to take home. So Shane's our mechanic. I got Frank back there. Frank is our body guy. Tom is someplace. I don't know where he is. Tom? He's well, he missed his window. So unless he's going to carry all the bags, I have no sympathy. I called him yesterday, but we don't go. You want to hear my laundry? We have Tom. Tom does our painting work and body work. Brad does our interior work and some mechanical work. So my wife Beth is, sometimes she thinks she's the boss, but I learned she's not here. I learned a very important lesson a while ago when I was going into business, and I told her that she worked for me, and that's not actually the case. So that was a learning curve. But what she did, she's in charge of the food today, and you did a good job. Yeah, so far. Everybody hasn't eaten yet, so maybe we should hold that until everybody has a chance to sample the food. So we're going to talk about that. I thought, real quick, I know I just want to go over a couple safety issues. I know I harped the hell out of fire extinguishers last year, so I'm not going to. All I ask is that everybody have a good working fire extinguisher in their car, and that at this time of year, maybe the thing to do is get your fire extinguisher out of your car. A lot of us carry dry chems. You want to turn the fire extinguisher over and hit it a couple times so that the powder in there does not get caked on the bottom. If the powder is caked, the fire extinguisher will not work. The other thing we're seeing a lot of issues with is rubber fuel lines. Just about all of us have rubber fuel lines in our car. The older style rubber does not jive well with the ethanol. So you want to absolutely. I guess he figured out how to dump the dumpster. The new ethanol gas does not jive with the rubber. Lately, or for a while now, we've been buying fuel injection hose, and we've been using that as a supplement to buying just regular fuel line. If you look at the box of a fuel line right now, if you go to Napa or whatever, it actually says evaporation hose. It doesn't necessarily say fuel line anymore. So the old stuff you used to get can be bad. So it might be a pain in the ass, but what you want to do is you want to get underneath the car, make sure all those rubber lines are okay before you start driving it this year. So, and just the usual stuff. All of our cars vibrate to some extent, so you want to make sure you're just checking the car over before you get in it and head down the road for the first time. We have we're standing up here and we're going to try to convey as much useful information as we can, but sometimes getting questions, and believe me, anybody can ask any question at any time, it's no problem. But sometimes, we can only convey so much. And sometimes for us, things seem like second nature, may not be second nature to everybody. But so if you have a question, please just stop we'll stop. You can ask a question.
Did everybody get a ticket?
Yeah. Did everybody get a ticket?
I didn't get one.
You came right, smart guy. So, if you have a question, if we go over something too fast, you want to have an explanation, please just raise your hand, and we'll stop and we'll answer your questions. Quinn.
How about that blue stuff that they have to put in the fuel, the ethanol fuel?
Yeah.
Will that work?
Yeah, there's a lot of things in the market today to help with the ethanol.
Will that help with the rubber hose situation or not?
No. I don't think so, personally.
Okay.
So, alcohol will turn the rubber, it'll actually make it hard and it'll crack. So, I mean, the ethanol the treatment may work a little bit, but it's not going to take that initial jolt out of it.
And it's supposed to announce the 10 gallons or something.
We pour a ton of that stuff in. I'm not a measurer. But it's just, and that brings up a whole other issue about we're all trying to tune our cars as best we can. The gas today doesn't have any pizzazz, so consequently we end up having to richen cars up to make them run right because there's no oomph in the gas anymore. So a lot of times we'll take a TR250 needle, we'll put it in a TR6. We'll put a Jag needle, maybe put it in a TR6. We'll take, we've tried everything. I mean, Joe Curra was on like my speed dial. I just gotta get this car to run right. So, long story short, it seems like it's getting more complicated to drive our cars than it used to be. It used to be you could buy gas in 3-4 years and the gas would work fine. Now you buy gas and in 2 months the gas is starting to go south. So it can be a little bit of a pain. I think also,
I'm just putting my fuel lines in now.
Yeah.
And I bought brand new rubber, but it's regular fuel line. Should I go ahead and continue to use that or take it out and put in the fuel injection line that you mentioned?
I would, if I couldn't verify what kind of fuel line it was, I would buy the fuel injection
It came
line.
from Rhodes Factory. So it's probably typical cut off of.
It could be anything.
Good for contours.
But I would really want to be careful about that.
So probably get the fuel injection.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, you can put any kind of fuel line on there and it'll last for a little while. But if you really want peace of mind, I would probably just get that.
There's only like 3 or 4 or 5
Yeah,
sections.
it's just a small here or there, just a penny short, but I would, it's gonna be the one in the worst spot. That's my opinion.
But what you said was fuel injection line, right?
Yes. Yes. The other thing I want to just comment on real quick is just stay within your comfort zone. If you're not comfortable working on certain aspects of your car, whether it's wiring, carburetors, engines, transmissions, or whatever, maybe ask for help. There's a lot of shops in the area that you can use, but
I know on my TR3, when I take the hose off, it starts running.
you can, if you,
It's always, you gotta do it, you gotta plan everything, you get it done fast, or else it's...
well, that's true. The other thing you can do is you can wait till you have maybe a quarter tank of gas or something like that. But the hardest one is the one in the back. Depending on whether your TR3 is original or not, there'd be a hard line from the tank to almost, at one point in time, it used to be a hard line right from the tank all the way to the carburetors, depending on what year it is. But a lot of times what happens is maybe the line went bad, they'll have a connector back, and then all you can do is just take a pair of vice grips, pinch the line, and then go ahead and change your fuel lines out that way, and then maybe address the one in the back. So there is no easy, there just isn't, it's all gravity. So. Oh, I would burn nothing but high test. I would burn the highest test you can get. And I'm not a big fan of dumping that 106 bar. Whoa! Let's get ready, boys! Get ready, boys! That's good rusty parts. It's okay.
Patina's not much.
So, getting back to his question, what's the right gas to use? And, I don't necessarily have the right answer for that, but if it were my car, I would always burn high test. I would get the highest test you can get. And back in the day, Sunoco had that 260 stuff. Man, that was great. But, when you're 18 or 16 years old, you couldn't afford it, so you had to buy the other stuff. So, yeah, I would absolutely buy some. The car was one of these, and it's not actually as high. So we talked about the comfort zone. One of the other things, and that kind of leads into, if you start working on your car, we have a tendency to get cars that people start to work on and they either lose interest or can't get it fixed. All I ask is that, if you're not comfortable doing something, just stop. And just take it to somebody that's comfortable working on your car, and you'll make my life a whole lot easier. Probably can. I'm sure you've seen some cars that maybe the customer should not have worked on it, but it can be really interesting sometimes. And at that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the turn the microphone on. Hold on a second. I turn it over to Mike. Mike works for us part-time. He does a lot of electrical stuff. Minister in charge of special projects. Yes. He tries to come down to our level. He's an electrical engineer, so, it doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and good luck.
All right, thank you.
Wild one.
As long as you have the width of the chair.
That's right.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Good, okay. I'm sorry, I have a cold as well. I'm on my second cold in many months. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about some of the things we see here, especially that I see, having to do with electrical systems. Go over some troubleshooting do's and don'ts and some modification do's and don'ts. I have seen some, one of a kinder word, interesting modifications done in some of these cars, and it amazes me every time I see one that they aren't bursting into flames every time the owner turns the keys. Because frankly, even the third string anemic handicapped electrons that come out of the British car electrical system will set the car on fire if given the right conditions. So anyway, let's get started. One of the things I see a lot of, and I have no idea why people do this, is the harness is actually cut open. They've sliced into the sheathing that covers the harness and just kind of flayed the whole thing out just to kind of see what's in there. And then the other fun one is somebody will decide, well, let's paint the underside of the dashboard, and they paint it, and now I have a big collection of wires that are all one color. You tell me where to start. So yeah, don't do that. There's no need. If you have to cut into the harness, there's a problem with the harness. If something's not working, it's not the harness usually, it's what's at either end. Lucas is great for not sealing switches. I mean, you can take switches apart. I've taken switches apart and cleaned them and put them back together, and they work perfectly. But because the switches aren't sealed, the weather gets in there, they get a little bit of corrosion on them, and then they just stop working. And you can, check things like door switches with an ohmmeter, and yeah, they are actually switching, but the closed state has such resistance that the light won't come on. Okay, well, and that's the explanation for that problem. So that's one thing. One of the other things we see a lot of are overheated connections. This came out of an MG about 3 weeks ago. This actually is the output, one of the output wires on the alternator. And this is the bit that plugs right into the back of the alternator.
Hey, that brings up a good point. And I shouldn't interrupt, but I'm going to constantly do it because it's my shop. That's my standby. He brings up a great point, and a lot of times what I was talking about before about keeping everything correct in your car, or correct as possible, is that sometimes we get a car in here like this MGB, and somebody tries to put the positive to the negative and the negative to the positive. The car does not like that. But what sets this whole thing in motion is they put a red cable on the negative side. Not to mention, so that starts the whole ball rolling. And then what they do is they can't get, and I'm just talking in general terms, I'm not talking about anybody in this room, certainly. Then what they do is, Because, you know, the big post is always positive, the small post is always negative. So what they do is, they can't get the positive post, so they either crush it to get it on the negative, or they expand to the point where it almost cracks to get it on the positive. So a real quick tip is, your battery cable, you know, your ends, your terminal ends should go right on the post. There shouldn't be any kind of monkeying around with it. So, but if they don't, there's a problem.
Yeah, yep,
I'll try not to.
okay.
You're doing a great job.
Great. Okay. Yeah, this came off of an MGB about 3 weeks ago. And what was happening here is, you get a little bit of corrosion on this connection, just a little bit, just a film, and it causes it to get a little bit warm. Well, when it warms up, then it gets a little more corrosion on it, which makes it get warmer and warmer and warmer. Well, ultimately, when I pulled this off, the connector, there was just a web holding it together, it actually broke in two because there was nothing really holding it. And as you can see, the wire is melted back almost 3/4 of that length. That's just the heat from that connection that's causing that problem. Now the customer was ready to, he bit the bullet and bought a complete wire harness from the dashboard forward. We saved him a small fortune because that basically was all that was wrong with his electrical system. And we repaired that wire and taped it back up, with the exception that the tape looked new compared to the other stuff. He was very happy and it worked just fine. But you can make repairs, but you got to watch out for stuff like this because you need to get back to a point where the sheathing is still intact. One of the other things.
Yep. You put on the connections for vent flow.
I will talk about that. One of the other things we also see is, I guess this is the reason the customer cut this open, is this wire is melted. I've seen wire harnesses, the whole length of the harness, one wire is just peeking out all the way down the length of the harness. A lot of times that's a ground fault. As two things cause that, and they're working together. Conspiracy, sounds like to me, is a fusing problem and a grounding problem. There was an issue about 2 years ago with fuses that were rated at a certain current rating to fail, yet didn't. And I saw a little movie of a test somebody was running where the wire is actually starting to turn black. And the fuse could care less. And they're watching an ammeter go up to 40 or 50 amps on a wire that size. That's not going to last very long. So that's the failure mode. So either the wrong fuse is in there or a fuse that doesn't have a correct rating. It's not what the engineer called out. And you've got a ground problem. So you've got a hot lead that's just basically turning red at that point. And it burns its way out of the harness. You can sort of repair that if you want to, but I would strongly recommend you replace the harness. And the harness for any British car pretty much is in 2 or 3 sections. So you only have to actually replace the piece that's bad. Yeah.
Are you talking about somebody putting in a 20 amp fuse where it falls for 15?
Yes.
Or are you talking about a 15 amp fuse that's not?
That's not 15 amps. It's more like 50.
But
Yeah,
it's
we've
marked
seen that.
50.
Yeah, it's marked 15, but it's more like 50 or better. You wouldn't. That's the problem. But I think they, sort of discovered that, but it didn't seem to be specific to Lucas fuses or the clear hooter fuses, because even some bus fuses were doing that. Bullet connectors. These little things here. Fuses or the clear hooter fuses, because even some bus fuses were doing that. Bullet connectors. These little things here. These are all over a wire harness. And I've run into issues when they get old, they break. This is basically just a piece of spring metal, and after a while they corrode, they get kind of brittle, and they just kind of snap. And you've got all these little pieces hiding in this rubber sleeve, and you don't really know it's not working. But you turn your lights on, and one set's real dim, and Another set's real bright, and then you realize, well, maybe I got a ground problem, and you pull the connector apart, and all the pieces fall out. Don't bother reusing these. If you've got an electrical problem, you're trying to trace something, you got a dirty connection, throw these away. Put in a new one. They aren't worth saving. The bullet end can be polished up with a little bit of Scotch-Brite, but frankly, doing anything with this is more trouble than it's worth. And this is my favorite. I don't know how many times I looked under a dashboard and found a wire that had burned out and it was all taped up, just like that. At best, this is temporary, and at the very least, you should find out why this happened, because it'll happen again. Again, this could go back to a fusing problem or something. We had a Healy in here a while back. I saw a lot of this under the dashboard. I suspect it was because it was converted from positive earth to negative earth. Because when we made the conversion, again, we were putting a radio in it. I missed a connection on the wire and actually saw a little bit of smoke coming out of the dashboard. Don't say that too loud. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. And then I was digging around trying to figure out what it was, and then I realized, yeah, okay, when you turn the switch to on, the white wire goes hot, and that's going straight to ground, and that's why it was doing that. So at least I understood why it was happening, and that was easy to undo that mistake. But again, there's a car that, in my opinion, as part of the work here, it should have gotten a new wire harness, because it was in tatters. So those are the big things. Those are the problems we see with troubleshooting and some of the things to look out for. Now, some things that are always a good idea. Number one, invest in a multimeter. These things are great. These are my eyes and ears. I use these all the time. This is a Fluke 77. They don't make the 77 anymore, and a Fluke meter they start at about $300. You don't have to spend that kind of money. Sears to the rescue. That's like $50. And it'll tell you all the same information. And you basically only need, for an automobile, DC current and voltage and resistance. Anything beyond that is just, extraneous information just makes it more useful for other things.
It's good to have one with an audible beep, though.
Yeah, a continuity tester makes it really nice because I can be poking around up in the dashboard and all I have to do is listen for the beep, and I know, yeah, okay, that one's good, and move on to the next one. That went crazy. This is about a $600 meter. This lives in a case.
I'm listening.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an automotive meter. It does a lot more than what you would need. But a simple 4-banger meter, man, that'll get you through 99% of what you need. Same thing can be said for a test lamp. These things are good too. Maybe they don't give you as much information. The meter is really good for specific information. We've run into situations where, yeah, I touch it, yeah, the light lit, but it didn't work. But when I went on the meter, it's like, okay, it's 6 volts, not 12. There's the problem. It's supposed to be 12. Or you've got something else going on. The test light won't tell you that, but it will at least tell you that something's there. Schematics. These things are great. I've looked more of these things than I care. The ones we offer through British Wiring are all color-coded. They're very easy to read. But it's like a roadmap. They don't tell all the story. They just give you a general idea. I was dealing with a Spitfire yesterday. First off, it took me about 20 minutes to figure out which car I was working on because you're never 100% certain. And there are running changes through production which aren't always reflected on these pieces of paper. So the schematic will give you an idea what you're looking for, and it will show you generally how things are supposed to be, but don't absolutely guarantee that that's what's in the car. Just because, somewhere along the line there, when this was issued, well, they may have had 20 or 30 harnesses they were trying to get rid of first. Yes, sir?
Where did you get that?
You can talk to our man Josh, but these kinds of things are in the back of any service manual. Then it's more a matter of being able to read them. Now, the great thing about British cars,
Not in color.
and I guess this is the thing, when you're on your own island, you can do whatever you want. Lucas being the manufacturer of British car wire harnesses, they use a common color code, and it's common throughout. So For example, a brown wire is a hot feed off the battery, always, always, always. It may not be connected directly to the battery, but at some point it finds its way back to the battery. A white wire is a switched hot off the battery, that's like usually ignition. Green is a fused switched off the ignition. Blue is lighting, red is lighting. Blue is headlamps, and red is side markers and parking lights and instrumentation. So, you know, just a couple of, just a short list of color codes, you almost know immediately what circuit you're working on. You almost don't need a schematic as long as you know what color the wire is. And that's common from the MG all the way to that Aston. That Aston is the same way.
Can you go through that colors?
Sure. A brown is hot feed off the battery.
Right.
Blue is supply to headlights. So if I come out the back of the headlight switch, I'm going to have a red wire that goes out to my parking lights and to my instrumentation cluster, but it usually goes to the instrumentation cluster through the rheostat. So it'll be red to the rheostat and then red with a white tracer off of that does all the little light bulbs. Blue is off of the switch that goes to the high-low beam, and then from there I break off, it's blue and red, blue and white.
And black.
Well, black, yeah, ground. And then,
Typically, your schematic gives you that, gives you that.
they'll give you the color codes, yes. They'll give you
what they're for.
they'll put a letter designation and then tell you, they'll give you a legend of what that means. And then white is switched hot feed, so that goes through the ignition switch. So I'll have a brown coming up the ignition switch, and then off of that will be a white wire that goes out the ignition circuit, goes out the start circuit, and to the fuse box, which then jumps and becomes green, and that's a fused switched ignition. So that's for your radio, turn signals, all that other stuff.
Where people can become confused with that is a lot of times the wires are striped color.
Yes, right.
It's not a solid color,
Right.
it's a striped color.
Yes.
To put an auxiliary plug in for a phone charger or a GPS, should you run an inline fuse off the battery
I would.
and not cut into the hot wire behind it?
If I was going to do it, I would find a spare terminal on the fuse box, for example. And you can get a piggyback male-female spade that'll slip on, so you could kind of, add a circuit without overloading your connection.
Right.
I think sometimes if a lot of people will try to go for green underneath the dash.
Yeah.
Because green is hot. And I think but the green's already doing a bunch of green stuff. So you start plugging into this, and then it doesn't.
It's more confusing when you turn everything on.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the wire harness on the TR3, and they take one tiny little wire, and it's here, and it does everything. And it's like, oh my God, what keeps this thing from just going woof, and all the cars goes up like
Same as check.
yeah, I'll talk about a little bit of that in a couple minutes.
Except for all the things that happen.
One of the biggest things when you're troubleshooting, and I do a lot of service work over the phone. People were trying to work on the stuff that I build, and dealing with lots of different skill levels, is I try to force the guy on the other end of the phone to be methodical. Don't jump around. Start at one spot, work your way down the line, because it's just one long straight path from here to there. Supply, delivery method, load, ground. I mean, and the problem is in one of those four. If something's not working, it's a switch issue. You've got a bad connection. You've got a bad ground. That sort of thing. If you're methodical, you'll find the problem.
And you could take that. I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but I just have to do that. The other aspect is that certainly on some of our British cars, you can just unplug stuff. So you can, as far as being methodical, as Mike was saying, you can. I know it happens here once in a while where we're trying to get something accomplished and we can't find the specific area. So what we'll do is we'll end up just unplugging stuff.
Yeah.
And trying to trace it out that way, and then you kind of get to the end. I mean, sometimes it's hard to find the problem, but if you start to unplug stuff and figure out what's going on, then you can
Yeah, when a car rolls in here, sometimes you have to approach it as a fresh sheet of paper. We don't know anything about the history of the car. We don't know what's been done to it. You kind of start from scratch and get a feel for what's been done. And again, being methodical that's a very good way to get through the problem quickly and get to the point where you get things working. Yes?
One thing on fuses, British spec fuses versus American fuses.
Right.
They're not the same.
Correct.
So,
What they list on there, for example, 35 amp fuse is, and I'm not the fuse expert here, but what's listed there is not the continuous rating. So like 35 amp fuse is actually 17 in continuous. 50 is something else. And again, I'm not the expert on fuses, but yeah, you can't just go out and say, oh, it's 35 amp, 35 amp fuse in there. You will have a problem. Intermittent issues. These things can drive you crazy. You know, my taillights worked yesterday and they don't work today, but I go over and whack the lens, they come back on again. This is why. It's this stupid little thing right here. And what they do is when they made it, they've got a beryllium copper ring, which is the tail that touches the side of the socket, and then they've got this spring finger bit that just fits on top of it, and they just sandwich the two together and then roll this nylon over it and just solder or weld, plastic weld the whole mess together. There's no true interface, it's just two pieces of metal touching each other. Well, after a while, you get a little layer of corrosion in there, and the headlight, it works or doesn't work. But as you drive the car, the parts are kind of rubbing against each other. Eventually, they start coming apart. The easy fix here is you go to Home Depot, you buy a $9 soldering iron. You scratch this little connection in here where the two sort of come apart from each other. Just scratch it, solder that joint together, and it will work forever. And it's just stupid junk like that makes us chase issues all day long.
Mike, what were you holding up? What is that?
Tail end socket, like a turn signal socket for a TR6. That's probably where that came from. Now you had asked, somebody had asked, how do you prevent corrosion issues in connections right here? Tube of dielectric grease made by Permatex. Buy it in any auto parts store. It's kind of a silicon-based grease, kind of white in color. It's very slimy. But you squirt a little bit of that into one of these, and then push the bullet in. That connection will be good forever. So this is the best way. Whenever I'm now doing work on my cars, this is always handy. Because I don't want to have to do it again.
They call it copper shield. I used to work on Thomas and Betts. And it's the same thing, but it's copper embedded high temperature grease.
Okay.
And I do it with each light bulb socket.
Yep.
I do it with anything I ever work on. If I take it apart, that goes on it. Even battery connections.
Right. This is good because it keeps the water out. But if you the British, for a country where it does nothing but rain, they make no effort to keep the water out. You look at a new car, and connector, and there's no ring in there, and there's grease. Put that together, and nothing's going to happen. And that connection will work forever. Our cars just, they weren't designed. It's called dielectric grease. Made by Permatex. Napa sells it. I've seen it in pretty much anywhere. Maybe in various size tubes. Okay, and then finally, I mean, face it, sometimes when it gets down to this, it's time to just replace it and be done with it. If you're just chasing problems one after another and everything you do just keeps getting worse, time to clean the slate and start over. Put that in the trash, get a new one, start over. I mean, you stop and think about it. The factory built these cars. They were small cars, cheap cars, built to a price. They were never really intended to last as long as they last. That they have lasted this long says a lot about how they've been cared for. But after a while, even a wire harness has to be considered a consumable item. Every car is probably going to end up getting a new one eventually. Okay, so that's some troubleshooting stuff. Modifications. I see these all the time. Sometimes they scare me. Other times, people who do this should be taken outside and beaten to death with their own inventions because they're just bad.
But he's not talking about customers.
Good thing I don't get to meet them sometimes because I have a few things to say about them. One of the things I see a lot of is I needed to do something. I had a couple scraps of wire laying around. I taped them together and I got a piece of wire now. Here you go. My son deals with people who do this all day long. They don't understand what's wrong with that. And the funny thing was, I put this together as show and tell, and I pulled it out this morning, I stretched it, and it popped, it came right apart. That's how good it is. I mean, all you've done is twist a couple pieces of wire together. You didn't do anything to try to make sure they stayed together. You're just relying on friction to hold them together. It's a perfect place for corrosion to get in. If you pull on it enough, it will come apart like that. This is garbage. So don't do this. This is bad. Don't do this. The other one that kills me is splices. I worked on a car where this was done quite a bit. I thought, well, somebody's taken a lot of care, but they still ended up with junk. They took a razor blade, they scored around this wire and stripped off a little section about that big, and then wrapped the splice around it and then just taped it up. That was the splice. Okay, well, it's pretty strong, I'll give it that, but you still have the same problems as you did with the other junk. You really didn't seal it, you didn't make a good mechanical and electrical connection, you just wrapped the wire around there and kind of tapped off.
About solder it.
Right. Solder it. Better yet,
It's not even the same color.
one of these. Yeah, one of these. This is an insulation displacement connector. Basically, it's a barrel connector with another barrel parallel to it, but that one doesn't go all the way through. And you clip the barrel onto the feeder and slide the tap into the other hole and squeeze the whole mess together. And there's a barb in there which actually forces the insulation apart and squeezes the wire into it. That will stay together forever.
Hey, Mike, if you mind. I'm sorry, make sure you tell everybody that they're banned.
They're banned here?
Yeah, I don't trust those. But
I've used some, and there's another type too.
Low current situation, low current is fine. High current,
Yeah, you gotta be careful with corrosion. Well, you still have, but they do seal a little bit better. They're certainly better than this. But yeah, if you want it done right, yeah, solder it, absolutely solder it.
You put dielectric grease on that too?
I don't know what, no, you really shouldn't have to because the barb actually pushes the insulation apart. So you've sort of got a seal between the insulation and the barb. So in some respects, it's kind of weather tight. But
some come with it inside already. The
yeah,
dielectric grease
yeah,
is
so,
inside.
yeah. They're making improvements to these. But again, it's kind of a modification. You do want to keep some of those things to a minimum. One of the things I've seen, and there's not a good way around it, is I want to add, auxiliary driving lights or something, and they'll just run a feed wire out along the main harness. At least you've done that much. But you've got a single conductor outside of everything else, just kind of rattling along with the car as it goes down the road. And to me, that's just, you're asking for trouble because you're going to eventually braid through that harness somewhere, and that lousy little wire is eventually going to find a ground, and then you might have an issue with that. If you've ever noticed one of the things that I like to see when you've got a single conductor is put a piece of sleeve over it, then that way at least you have 2 layers of insulation, which prevent that problem. Ball of wire. How many times I've taken a paddle off and it's just stuffed. I mean, it just crammed full of wire. And you pull it out and it's just a rat's nest of wire. I don't even know where to start with that mess. Get what's broken fixed, stuff it back in, hope it doesn't short, get the car on the way. Because if you turn me loose on it, I would spend days on it, and that's not what the customer's looking for. But you can't tell him he doesn't know what he's doing because he doesn't want to hear that either. But yeah, I mean, unlike horsepower, more wire is not better. It's just seems more trouble. Black tape. One of the most overused tools in the inventory, I'm sure. They use it for everything. Use it sparingly. Seriously, the glue gets creepy when it gets hot. It gets kind of slippery, so it really doesn't act like tape anymore. And when it gets cold, it gets brittle, and the glue gets hard, and it just comes apart. So this is really only, I use it a little bit when you're running up you're making up a harness, you get to the end of the sheathing, just one little turn just to kind of seal it all off.
Question.
Yeah.
After something like that, situation where you solder two wires together, they also sell those cans of the dip, the glue dip,
Yeah.
plastic dip, that solidifies.
Mhm.
If you have the option. Use it, is that,
Liquid tape,
is
yeah.
that better
I've never used it, but
than that? Right.
yeah, I mean, anything that insulates the connection, that's really what you're looking
That's
at.
better than the tape, so it'll fall
Yeah.
around it.
Right.
Corner.
Right, but I've never used it, so I can't speak from experience. Yes,
There's lots of grades of electrical tape.
yeah,
Harbor Freight tape, not so good. If you go in to buy the, I think it's 3M
yeah,
or Scotch at Home Depot or one of the other stores, it's quite expensive for a roll,
right.
but it's superior.
Well, that's what this is actually, this is Scotch 3M, but still, I mean, I see so much of it used all over the place that to me it's an overused tool.
I miss the old cloth friction tape. You just can't find it anymore.
Yeah,
To me, one of the best.
right, but you still have the same problem, the glue eventually dries out.
Yeah.
Question,
Yes,
what about the use of that heat shrink tubing?
that is my first choice, always.
Just remember to put it on first though.
Um,
Hey, Mike, how do you feel about all the various solderless crimp-on ends?
I've used a few of them, but a lot of times what I have, I bought an assortment of barrel connectors. They're actually just the metal element that's in that, and crimped it and soldered it. So the kind of belts and braces sort of approach. Yes?
What kind of sheathing is on the replacement harnesses that are available now? 'Cause there's different choices, right?
Yeah, you either get cloth or you get tape.
No, you just said don't use tape.
Well, no. The tape that they're using is vinyl tape, but it has no glue.
Right.
So you just, it's a wrap, it's just a wrap. And actually, I think if you look at one of the harnesses you could buy here, I think when they get to the end of the wrap, they even use a little piece of shrink tube on it. So you just put that on, heat it, and then that's never comes off.
Is there any reason to choose one over the other?
Authenticity. Authenticity.
It's the model of the car.
Correct, yes. The earlier cars had a cloth insulation, cloth jacket. The later cars went to the tape one. Okay, all right.
Your car must have to.
Some of the modifications I've come across. This is lamp cord. I've seen this under a dashboard. Okay. Now, all right, it's a piece of wire, I'll give you that, but last time I checked, my living room didn't do 60 miles an hour. The problem here is that the insulation on this is made for an environment that's relatively constant. I mean, the temperature change in your house is probably only about plus or minus 30 degrees. Humidity is relatively constant. And the lamp just sits on the table. Now, I'm sure my Mini will tell you that it got down to 0 a couple times this winter. And I park it buttoned up, sitting in the parking lot, and I'm sure it could get over 120 during the daytime in the summer. The insulation on this wire is not made for those kind of temperature extremes, and it will fail eventually. And that's why you don't use this. I've also seen this. This belongs in my house. Solid single conductor 18 gauge or 12 gauge house wire. Problem here is this stuff is really brittle. It doesn't want to bend. So if you bend it a couple times, it'll work and it'll fail. So at the very least, it's the wrong type of wire. I've also seen foam cord. The 4 conductor, single strand, foam cord. 22, yeah, or 20, or they make another one, I think, too, that's a little bit stiffer. All these things just make me laugh. And then I just want to hurt the person that did that.
The Cat 5 wire on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't, yeah, wire's wire, right? What's the problem? And finally, wire nuts. Now, I can't specifically cite anything that's wrong with using a wire nut. It makes a good mechanical connection. But I have to borrow a line from the boat building or aircraft construction industry that if it looks right, it is right. And this just doesn't look right, I'm sorry. So, those are all the things I've seen that you want to try to avoid. So when it comes to some modifications, really you want to employ what in the industry would be called good practice. This is just a show and tell item. I tossed this together yesterday. This was a language course. This would be total gibberish. This isn't anything whatsoever. But it was just done just to kind of show how it's done. It's got the proper terminations on it for bullet connectors and for spade connectors. Single strand that would run out by itself was in a sleeve. Got a good fitting grommet if I had to go through a bulkhead. It's all wrapped with the non-sticky tape. And at the end of the termination, a single turn with black tape just to seal it all up, because with the non-stick tape, when you got to the end of the run and you stopped, if you let it go, it eventually would kind of creep backwards and start to unwrap itself. So you got to have something that finishes the job. You could do it this way or use heat shrink. And the idea, when you're done and you put this modification in, it should look like it was born in the car, like it was designed in and built and put in at the factory. If you've done that, you can make all the modifications you want because they're hidden effectively in my mind. Let's see.
And Mike,
or don't.
Mike,
Yes.
thanks to this place, we can now buy bullet connectors.
Yes.
When you never could.
That's right.
However, I learned here a couple years ago why I can't use them at home.
Okay.
Now tell us how to put a bullet on a wire.
You need the tool.
Be a special.
Well, yeah, but not with a tool, not with an iron. Here they use sometimes a torch. They get it really hot to melt the solder into the bullet.
Right. Right.
I get the bullet isn't enough.
The bullet isn't enough. The crimp works. But yeah, I've seen, if you look real close on factory harness, they are soldered as well. Problem with soldering though is it does, if you're not really careful, it leaves a blob of solder on the outside and the thing doesn't want to fit into the sleeve.
Well, there's two different bullet connectors, one that is made to be crimped and one that's supposed to be soldered.
Right.
They use one with the other.
Right. Most of the ones that we offer here that I know of are crimpable. They fit in the gun. They're all in different sizes. Yeah. You're making a modification to your car, and you always want to make sure that you leave yourself enough wire. Obviously, somebody didn't leave themselves enough wire, and they got this tiny little stub right here with a connection in it. If I have to cut off and throw away 3 feet of wire, I'll do that rather than be 3 inches short. Just to me, and I've just wasted my time. Always use a grommet when you go through a bulkhead, because if you don't, that harness will just sit there and rub against that sharp edge, and eventually all your good work is going to go to naught. And finally, again, if 3 feet of wire is enough, use 3 feet. Don't use 5. Any other questions?
Hey,
Yes.
I'm going to be putting in a new wiring harness soon.
Okay.
What tools would I need to do that, or is it just plug it in?
It's kind of plug and play. Schematic's a big help.
No, but I mean as far as the ends, they're all ready to go. You just plug them in. You don't have to buy the tool at that point because you're not fixing and repairing.
Correct. The only thing you might run into is anything that remains behind in the car. It's not part of the harness you're replacing. For example, like I know on an MG, when you come through the bulkhead and past the heater, you've got a couple pairs that hit some connectors. One set goes out to the reverse light switch, and the other set goes down to the starter motor, or starter, or something to do with the starter. Those pieces I don't think are included. So if you pull the connector apart, a lot of bullets come off. But again, that's something you approach when you get there. Hold on 1 second. When you take the old harness out, don't chop it up. Remove it whole. Lay it out on the floor. It'd be a big help. You use it as a road map, just kind of get an idea. Okay, I remember this came off of there. Tag a few things if you have to, because that's always a big help. Yes, sir.
Battery disconnect.
Yeah.
What's the better one inside?
What's our money stuff?
Who took it apart?
We tried to put it on the negative side.
Yes,
The bullets, when they go into that four-way spade or whatever you
Right.
call it, sometimes you can't push them in.
right.
I understand now they have a tool
Yep.
that pops them together.
Mhm.
Before I found out about that tool, I took a pliers and I modified it,
Oh, okay.
stick it over both ends.
I used to use a small screwdriver, just get behind the bullet and give it a good shot, but if the screwdriver slips, you're gonna put the
Yeah,
screwdriver
yeah,
to your
yeah.
hand.
Going back there, I was, I used a pair of channel locks, and I still use a pair of channel locks. I've done it forever, and it works very good for, we do sell a tool, British Wiring has a tool that'll actually help put the bullets, you know, the bullets in the sleeves, and it can be a pain in the butt. There was a problem a few years ago, well, probably 5 years or so ago, that the actual bullets were just a hair too big, and you try to put them into the sleeve, it was a pain in the you know what. So, but what that did, that translates into taking something apart. Now you can't get the bullet out of the sleeve. So then you're pulling the bullets, you know, because the crimp is only going to crimp it so hard. So now you've got a bullet inside the sleeve, and now you're kind of, but that's been resolved. But I brought out some of my tools that I keep in my toolbox, just very generic.
And these do 3 different sizes of the spade connectors, both male and female. This is the tool for the bullet connector. You'll notice, if you look at the bullet connector, they have different size holes in them, but the body of the bullet, the outer diameter is always the same, so it all fits in the same tool.
Yeah, I got that tool.
Yeah. I bought a set for myself for Christmas.
I took a regular pair of pliers and I took a small file a little groove in it so it fit over top of it. You did know both sides and push through.
Yep. And then just a pair of wire strippers. Sears. Yes?
You mentioned the battery cutoff switch on the negative side. Is it positive ground cords or negative ground cords, or either doesn't matter?
It really doesn't matter. You're just trying to isolate the battery.
Is that a good idea to do or needs to go through that connection?
All you're doing is taking the terminal off, putting this switch thing in between and putting the terminal back on. So you're really not undoing anything, you're just adding a switch in between.
That's okay, I have this too.
Yeah. No, I don't.
What's the purpose of it?
Just isolate the battery. If you put in a new, well, in an emergency, you certainly have that. Yeah, right. Well, in an emergency, you've got that. But new radios today, for example, have a constant feed that maintains the battery's memory, or the radio's memory for the presets. But that's a constant 10 milliamp draw all the time. Well, eventually, you know, give it 2 or 3 months, the car just sitting there, you're gonna have a flat battery.
You can buy an inexpensive battery tender and hook it up
Yeah.
also.
Right, well, unless you're like me who parks my car in my shed and the electrical service is 100 feet away. Yes?
About those bullets stuck in the sleeve.
Yes?
Replace the sleeve or?
No, you can, I've done that where I was working on something, pulled it apart and a wretched bullet stayed in the sleeve. I just took a thin screwdriver, plucked it up inside and went bang and the bullet just popped right out.
Thank you.
You know, the other thing you can do real quick is if you take the rubber, the actual rubber piece of the sleeve off, you'll notice that the metal part of the sleeve has a slot in it.
Yeah, it does have a slot in
So
it.
you could just pull the rubber off, take a little screwdriver, expand that
Actually
sleeve
pry it
ever so
apart
slightly,
slightly to get inside.
and then it'll pull right out.
Yes?
About the battery disconnect switch, you put the battery disconnect on the side of the battery that's to the ground. Then if something connected to the car does happen to fall onto the positive terminal of the battery,
Oh, okay.
it won't short out.
Okay.
Whereas if it's disconnected on the positive side, if you still touch the positive
Right.
terminal,
It's still,
it could
that's still
short.
hot.
So
The thing is, you're limited, especially on a positive earth, you're limited because the posts are different size,
Right.
and that disconnect is a certain size.
Right. Yes?
What I did, about, I don't know, 35 years ago, I put a switch in the glove compartment, in the back of the glove compartment, the toggle switch, locks your glove in.
Okay.
And I wired the ignition wire through that switch. And when I'm in the area where I want to shut the thing up, I just
Okay,
over
yeah,
there.
right.
To me, it'll drive someone
The master
nuts
cutoff.
trying to find that cutoff.
Yeah, I know, I've run into that where I was trying to get a car started, I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't start. But I finally broke the car apart, oh, look at this, that's what that switch is doing. Yes?
Just a theoretical thing, going back to the dielectric grease. I'm a little bit, always been a little bit confused about that, because the grease itself is not a conductor. Is that
Correct, it's not a conductor.
But you're putting it like, I used it on sockets, you know, for screw-in bulbs and things like that. So, I guess, to me, it would seem that it would interfere with the connection, but it never seems to.
Really, what's happening,
Is it
your
just
connection's still an
displacing?
electrical
Here we go.
connection. It just keeps moisture out and keeps it from
Yeah.
corroding. That's all it really
Yeah, but if
does.
it's in between, you know.
And it
Well,
makes it easier.
Yeah, but as you're
forces
putting it
out.
together, it's scraping it apart. It
Yeah.
just protects electrical connections, ignition parts, and wiring from moisture, salt, dirt, and corrosion.
It also makes the bulbs easier
Yeah,
to
no,
come out.
I know what it, you know, what it does, it's just always, I always felt that, you know, you put, yeah, it's counterintuitive, it puts on a layer
Well,
of
to
something.
me, it's dielectric.
It's
Actually, it's later.
When you put your, when I bought my car in '73, it wipes that off.
It
didn't have any
Designed to do that.
dielectric.
And it
Because
protects
it's
So I used the white lithium grease. Every time I really replaced the bulb or opened the connection up, it's still there, and it's actually.
And it works the same way.
Over years, but it's still protected.
And it works the same way, it just displaces the water.
You know, I think something about the dielectric grease is different than the.
Here's something else that's
The lithium grease is.
How does W
that doesn't necessarily migrate like the lithium grease could. So depending on the temperature, wherever you're using it, lithium has a tendency to creep, where that wouldn't creep, so to say. I mean, it accomplishes the same thing, it doesn't really matter, but
I only use the dielectric now, but the lithium was there from way back in '73. It's not actually sort of dry in there, even though it still protects, so when I take it out, I had to clean that off. I also keep that dielectric in the house when I put a light bulb in or something.
Yeah, because
It keeps.
I've worked on high bay lights, and when you got that big bulb in your hand and you're 20 feet off, you screw that thing, you hear it squeaking, you know it's driving by. Yes, in the back.
Getting back to the battery tenders, on Optima batteries, do you have to have a special tender for that one? Some
I
people
don't-
say you should, some people say you don't.
I couldn't tell you.
I haven't had an issue with that. You know, I was under the impression the same thing you're, you know, you gotta be careful, blah, blah, blah. I just put them on the charger. You know, it's a different style battery, but the bottom line is.
I know they say you're supposed to.
They're a marine gel battery, but they work basically on the same principle, so I wouldn't see why there'd be a difference. Yes, sir?
Like, you use the dielectric grease with battery clips as well?
No.
What do you use it for?
What was the question?
I do. I use
Yeah, I suppose you could, but I haven't done it.
I do.
Using
Never been a
dielectric
problem.
grease on a battery, I guess you could.
This battery's
Just keeps corrosion down, but I try to keep the battery clean so you don't have that, you know, that acid working its way across the top of the battery. Yes?
Well, going back to the battery tender, I just bought one this past year from Eastwood, and it has a switch on it for an Optima battery.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what it does, but.
Back to the grease issue, dielectric versus regular grease. I used to work for a company that made grease, one of the big grease making companies. Dielectric grease is not supposed to conduct electricity.
Right.
It's formulated not to conduct electricity.
That's what a dielectric is.
Right, there's a
It's
lot of
actually insulated.
additives in regular grease that is conductive.
Mhm.
So it's theoretically possible that if you use regular grease on an electric connection, it could allow some electricity to leak through.
Kind of leak, yeah. Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, it could allow electricity to leak out into something else.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a 18 ACR on my car, as
Okay.
far as the alternator goes.
You're asking me a real good question.
Okay, is it true that I have 15 amps of draw extra if I want to add something like a fan or whatever?
Yes,
that I
as
can
the number
still
goes
use
up,
that?
the output of the alternator is improved.
I think that puts out about 43, so I got a little
Yeah,
extra room there.
you're in about 50 amp range. So yeah, that's giving you a little extra capacity. That stag parked out there, that's mine. That's an 18 ACR alternator, and that car needs every ounce it can get because it has air and power windows and all. And I was thinking to myself, you know, I don't know if that alternator is actually big enough considering all the loads. Because the new car is going to be 100 amps easily, which is why one of the popular upgrades is put the GM alternator
Put on your regular TR6 without air conditioning, you got a little room there.
I put a 16 ACR or 17 ACR on my Mini, which is basically a radial fan and wipers. And I watch, when I'm sitting at a traffic light on a cold morning with the heater going, the wipers running, and the lights on, and that voltmeter is at 12 volts. And it's like, you know, I've improved it and it's still not good enough.
Yeah, since we're talking about conversions, you know, upgrading the alternator, I've heard that you shouldn't go too high with the amperage.
Correct.
Because if the wiring can't handle it.
Yeah, if you don't upgrade the wiring, if you fire up the car on a dead battery and the alternator is doing its mightiest to charge the battery, you'll melt the harness. Because you're going to be putting out the full output of that alternator in wire that was never intended for that.
So a lot of people are doing these conversions. How much of the wiring has to be replaced? Because obviously, I mean, you're not going to replace like the taillight wires and
No,
stuff like that.
all you would have to really do is upgrade the wiring between the alternator and the battery.
You know, you can take spaces and just take around.
Yeah. Right.
So if you're putting in, bottom line is, if you're going to put one of those big honking 100 amp alternators in your car because you want to run, I know Bill, you like your music really loud, and 200 watts is good. He's a party animal.
Got one of those thumpers.
Yeah. I can hear you coming over. But the bottom line is, we do some of those kind of crazy, I call them kind of crazy conversions, where we're putting a 100 amp alternator in the Triumph, and you know, the car's not going to be very happy with that unless you take some of that voltage off of the amperage off the system, because the system can't handle it. So that's a great question. But if you take a brown wire, we try to use the correct wire depending on what we're doing. If you use a brown wire, go from the alternator to the battery, that will drain off some.
You'll give a better path back.
Yes.
You'll be charging the battery directly as opposed to through the harness.
Yeah, I guess the same thing for the upgrade of the headlights. Equipment.
Yes.
The current wire that's in there now, what's that rated for? Like I got the 18 ACR in there, what if I maxed out on that? Would the current wiring handle that, or would that be upgraded?
No. I think your 18 ACR is okay.
Even if
you
you
have
maxed
two wires
it out?
on the alternator, there 3 wires on the alternator or 2? If you have 2 wires, if it's a 3-wire plug, there are 3 wires in it. One wire, the small one, is the sense wire, and the other 2 are the output of the alternator. And they're both heavy, so you shouldn't have an issue. If you have a 2-wire connection, you have a small one and a big one, I think they both go back to the battery. That way you might be pretty close to the limit, but you still should be okay. Yes?
What about relays or the headlamp? You know, they all recommend
Right.
small cell.
Right. Yeah, because, you know, when you really think about it, you're putting the British never believed in relays. Put the full draw through every switch, which is why the switches melt for a while, especially as you get old. But yeah, if you can do a relay upgrade, absolutely, because I did, I have an old Mini, which I use for every day, and I took out this single little, you could barely hear it, sounded like a baby belching horn, which also was kind of a little early. I wanted a horn. I wanted people to hear me coming. And I put 2 horns in it, and I pushed the button, and they didn't make a sound. But the single horn worked. I was like, okay, I can't put enough through this switch to make that happen. So now the horn button triggers a relay, which fires the horn, and now the horns sound. They sound nice and loud. So yeah, when you go to a relay upgrade, yeah, what you're doing is you're taking battery power to run the load, not letting it go through the switch. The switch is just firing the relay. But that's always a good upgrade. Yes, in the
Is there
back.
an alternator between the stock Triumph alternator and the 100 amp?
Say again?
Alternator in between, the 100 amp and the...
Yeah, I mean, the General Motors makes all kinds of different outputs, but, 100 amps is a big upgrade. I'm sure you can find something, between 50 and 100. Yep.
The versions that you sell here, what size is that at?
That's a 65. That's 65. There you go. There's your answer.
That's just a regular Delco. It's a knockoff of a Delco 70s style single wire alternator. But at 65 amps, you're still able to maintain the original harness's integrity. So, unless you really stress it out, it's not, because it doesn't charge itself, it's not pushing 65 amps all the time.
Yeah, that's only momentary to get that kind of surge.
Yeah, you have to really push things a lot, but, that, you can put that alternator on your car, we put them on TR4s, TR3s, and to no adverse effect.
Yes?
How do you feel about adding fuses to the British car?
You never have enough. I'll tell you a little story. I used to, when I first started working, my brother is a mechanic, and he got involved with somebody who was doing gray market conversions. And we got a chance to see one of the first 928s come in before the dealers, or just about the time the dealers were getting it. And in the kick panel on the passenger side, you pulled the carpet down, and there was a wooden door with a little hole in it. Pulled that door up, and I call it the fuse room. I mean, there was a fuse box that long, and then there was a bank of relays underneath it, and just it looked like a telephone interchange with all the wires that came in. You can never have it. And I mean, every load, every light, every switch, everything had its own fuse.
2 fuses just doesn't seem like very.
No, the early cars, 2, 3s, and 4s, they scare me with that. And even the 3-fuse box to my mind isn't enough. Yes?
Could you just explain what a relay is and what it does?
Your starter has one.
Yeah, your starter has one, but that's a really big one. Yeah, okay. What I have is, I'll try to give you a description. I have a bobbin of wire. It's a coil of wire. And inside of it is a metal plunger. And the plunger has a switch contact across it. So when I energize this coil of wire, it creates a magnetic field, which pulls the bobbin down hard. And that makes the contact connection. And then that's what delivers power to the load. And when I turn the power off, the relay, the magnetic field collapses and the spring forces the contact open. Now the thing about a relay is that and the reason to use a relay is you can use 1 amp to control 1,000. All right, if I had a switch, if I actually had a horn button that was rated for the 15 amps that the horns required, I'd have a horn button that'd be that big and it'd be all contact inside. But the relay can be real small. I got a 15 amp relay that's the size of an ice cube.
So you got more going in and less coming out.
No, the other way around. I'm using a small current, I'm using a little bit to control a really big one. Power companies do the same thing.
The small current is actually a switch.
Is the
It
control,
switches
yeah.
a small electromagnet. The electromagnet actually makes your contact with your higher load.
The relay local to the load?
I could place it anywhere. Yeah. Or I could group similar functions and their operations together. Yes.
We're talking about, since we're talking about relays, is there, how specific need they be? In other words, I mean, do they can you use pretty much one relay for anything you need a relay?
From what I can see, there are 2 different types of relays. There is one which is a normally open, normally closed. So I have a common and a normally open, normally closed. And then there is another type which is a normally open, but it has 2. So what it makes, I'm actually putting power out to 2 connections. Yeah, thank you. Lost that for a moment. The thing you got to watch out for is that sometimes the sockets are similar. And we got a car in here, Land Rover or something, was doing all kinds of weird things, and I'm searching, and I pulled the relay out. I was like, wait a minute. They're both 87A, which means they both go hot when the relay operates, and then I needed a normally open, normally closed. I needed the other type, 56 or 33 or something. So somebody had just, oh, I need a relay, and they put the wrong one in, and then problems ensue. So you didn't read the label.
Way of knowing,
You can read the labels, and the label will give you actually a little schematic diagram. It will show you, label the connection numbers for the coil and the relay contact.
There's current range relays, and there's also, we have to be careful, there's also relays for AC current.
Yes, yeah, right.
Don't want to try to
You
use
can't swap those two, because the DC one will go blah, 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 blah. Yeah, right. And also, the wire colors I gave you a while back, that information is printed in the back of every lost catalog, by the way. Okay. I think we're done. Hope you learned something. Mike, thank you very much. Probably need a drink of water. Hey, just a couple things, business-wise. I need to put a plug in for the Cars Motorcycle Show of England. It's going to be May 31st. I should know this already because I've seen it a bunch of times. But it's hosted by the Delaware Valley Triumph and the Delaware Valley Jaguar Club. So these are going to be on the table out there. Before you walk out the door, there's a table. We have some pamphlets for Brad Penn Oil and a couple other club issues. So you're more than welcome to grab one and take a look at that. One thing I did want to do, we have a giveaway here today. I think everybody got a ticket. Did everybody? Just want to double check everybody get a ticket. What we're going to do this year is I have some bullets and sleeves, and I have one of our tools, our crimping tools that we're going to give away. So they're, to us, we use this tool all the time, as Mike was saying. You know, they're pretty indispensable here, and it does a great job. So anyway, we have that. And what I'd like to do, if I could, maybe Lyle, can you give me a hand real quick? You don't mind being pressed in the service. Like that, yeah. I hope he doesn't win. This is going to look awfully bad. I promise I didn't fold the ticket or anything. Okay, we have 0064, so it's 390064. Okay. It's when you get up. Okay. We can work on that. This tool is $55, and you know it's I'm not trying to do a sales ploy, but it's a great tool. Like I said, we use this almost every day here.
What's the cost of it?
What's that?
What's the cost of it?
The tool costs $55. Oh, we sell them. That's the sales point. But if you naturally, not everybody needs one, but if the club wants to buy one, and then you guys can borrow off the club or something like that. So they come in handy. The other thing, as Mike was saying, we also sell these to put the spade connectors on and so forth. Another great tool. Here again, we do it all the time here, so it makes sense for us to have multiple tools like that. But so they work out great. I'm just trying to check. Is there anybody have any other questions not related to wiring?
Carol, you mentioned about the track and car extinguisher. What do you recommend?
For my own car, I think I would get Halo.
Halo?
Dry chem is corrosive, so it's great if you're using it on your neighbor's car, but it's not so great if you're using it on your car. But the bottom line is, it's the cheapest
Other than pouring water on your car, it's probably the cheapest agent out there to get the job. All you're really trying to do is smother it. So, oh, you can get an ABC fire extinguisher anywhere. And, you know, it's directly related to, you know, the poundage, let's say 1 pounder, 3 pounder, whatever. It's really just the spray time you get, the discharge time you get. So, I mean, I would, the minimum would be a 1 pounder, but I would probably try to go with like a 2.5 or a 2 pounder. That would at least give you like maybe 10, 15 seconds of discharge. No, I don't sell them, but
I thought Halon was outlawed.
it's an environmentally friendly halon. Yeah.
It's called Halotron.
Yeah, Halotron. But you know, it's good.
Marine stores sell all different kinds of fire extinguishers, including this deal.
Yeah, you can. I think you can. Yeah. It's environmentally friendly, but what it does is it doesn't leave any residue. You can use that, and it's virtually, you know, it becomes, it's liquid in the container, it comes out as a gas. So, you know, there's no cleanup. So,
Is there any benefit to keeping a fire blanket in your car?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how brave you want to be. Not that I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm just thinking, most people don't necessarily stop, drop, and roll. Stop, drop, and roll in your cars. You could use that, but I don't know. The one thing you're trying to do is try to take the, I promise I will talk about this, but the one thing you're trying to do is remove the oxygen. You know, you take that little sort of triangle, you've got to do those things for the fire to go out. So the bottom line is, the easiest thing for us to do is probably take the oxygen out. Sometimes the fuel's too hard, right? So, or you try to cool it. Well, you know, when you're putting dry chem on there or halon or whatever, you're actually just depriving it of oxygen. So, you know, you could only, it's just another tool. It's like having a charged cell phone. I hope everybody has a charged cell phone. What I did, I was going to check with my wife to see if she got, we were waiting for one part of the meal to come. Hey, Josh, did the other part of the meal show? One thing I did want to say is, you know, you guys are more than welcome to come up here and look at the stuff we have, try it out. Certainly don't try it out on the new harness, but you can certainly, if you need help with a multimeter, we can show you how to use one, it's no big deal. If you want to use some tools, we can get some bullets up here, you can try that. What I know is, go ahead.
You have that tool that strips all together?
Yeah, he has it right now.
Not that one, I'm talking about the one that pushes through.
Oh, I'll get one.
Show
Yeah, I'll leave it up here on the table. Yeah, Dave.
Can I just make a real quick announcement for the DVT members here? I'm passing around the sign-up sheet, so if you would just, so it goes around, if you're a DVT member, please sign up. If you're not, just pass it, keep passing it around, please.
Okay. We're gonna basically break for lunch. Now, what we normally do is we have our main spiel before lunch, and then we don't really, you know, we're here to answer questions after lunch. We can help you guys, questions, answers, whatever you need. We don't necessarily have a formal program after lunch. So that kind of concludes our program for today. I'll get one of those tools up here. You guys can look at it, but you're more than welcome to try this stuff. Thank you.